thought for this iteration of my season as a United fan, I'd travel back to a point where I couldn't even reminisce, when I wasn't even a United fan, to the 1975-76 campaign. I wouldn't come into existence until just over a year later, but this season of the Doc's Red and White Army, massive away support, lots of needle and hooliganism on the road, saw us with a half-decent chance on the pitch of winning the double. So let's travel back to the summer of 1975. The first Cricket World Cup took place. Ronald Reagan announced his intention to run in the Republican primary against President Gerald Ford. Pelé signed for the New York Cosmos, and Manchester United were preparing for a return to the top flight of English football after being crowned Division 2 champions. Martin Buchan had just replaced Willie Morgan as skipper, who had left Old Trafford that June. The year before, in the summer of 74, the Doc, who had taken United down after a season and a half of tumultuous top-flight fights for survival, knew what it took to get the club out of the mire at the first attempt. He needed to focus on youth and grit. He brought in Stuart Pancho Pearson that season to get the goals, as well as Ron Tudor-Davies and Jim McCalliog from Wolves. Up to the present day, in June 1975, after a successful campaign in Division 2, Tudor-Davies had gone, and Jim McCalliog was shipped off to Southampton by the July. Still with a focus on youth, a Scouse University student studying economics was recruited earlier in 1975 to help the promotion push. Young Steve Coppell's contribution was invaluable. There were also a couple of notable trainee additions. A young Mike Duxbury was signed in May 1975, and Andy Ritchie would join him in the youth side in October of this year. Having just been promoted as champions along with Villa and Norwich, United were going for silverware on three fronts: the League, FA Cup and League Cup. European participation in one of the three major European trophies would have to be earned again for the first time since the late 60s. And before we begin, just a reminder, there were 22 teams in the top flight this season. It was still 2 points for a win in the league. There was no back pass rule, of course, and the offside and handball rules would be unrecognisable from today's interpretation. There were thankfully no squad numbers, and players wore my personal preference of 1 to 11 on the pitch, but you were only allowed one measly sub. There were still very few black players who'd managed to break through to professional football at that time. Stadiums were rife with hooliganism and racism, and whilst there were still consistent big clubs, fairly obscure sides could still rise to prominence. Indeed, Derby County were defending champions, and had won their only 2 league titles in their history within the 4 previous seasons. Anyway, I could go on about the differences in strips, pitches, terraces, and real fans, but let's just get on with the football. The pundits all question whether United could be as aggressively attacking as they were in the previous season in the second tier against lesser opposition. Whether United could or couldn't, Tommy Docherty was in no doubt and didn't change his attacking strategy. The Old Trafford faithful loved it. United strangely had their first 2 matches away from home. I guess there was no fixture computer in those days as well. But both games were comfortably won in the Midlands as Macari and McElroy grabbed a brace apiece to help record 2-0 scorelines at Wolves and Birmingham respectively. Already top of the league, United extended that by winning their first home game of the season, 5-1 against Sheffield United. It was a fixture-packed month, but the boys remained unbeaten, albeit securing a disappointing 1-1 draw at home to Coventry. That unbeaten start gave the lads the lead over unlikely second-place side West Ham by a point. Unbeaten QPR were in third alongside Everton and Leeds, who all had 7 points apiece. Tommy Doc won the inaugural Manager of the Month award for August 1975. United began September with a solid 3-2 victory over a Spurs side that had seen better days, but then had to go to Loftus Road against high-flying QPR. Rangers inflicted our first defeat of the season, which hurt as we were in very good form, albeit championship talk would be very premature at this stage. A narrow win in the next league match against Ipswich, with a rare winner from Stuart Houston, was brief respite as we failed to win for the next 3 matches. Back-to-back away games saw a defeat at the baseball ground against the champions and a Manchester derby draw of 2-2 at Main Road. Those results saw us drop to third on goal difference by the month's end, as West Ham continued their solid early season form, leading from QPR. Leeds, Everton and Liverpool completed the top 6. On the 10th of September, the Docks lads began their League Cup campaign, a trophy that still eluded the Red Devils up to that point. Drawn against Brentford at Old Trafford in round 2, they scraped through 2-1 thanks again to Macari and McElroy. This set up a trip to Villa Park in the third round, which United won. Another away fixture beckoned, but it would be far more challenging ask, a derby date at Main Road in mid-November. October began with a lacklustre goalless draw at Old Trafford against Leicester. However, it was then followed by 2 solid wins. First, a 2-1 victory at Ellen Road, where even Billy Bremner admitted that our style made us almost unplayable, and that was followed by this 3-1 victory over Arsenal at Old Trafford, which sent us back to the top of the league. However, a poor 2-1 defeat at the Boleyn Ground against West Ham, who were also challenging at this stage, saw us in third at the month's end and edged out into second spot by QPR on goal difference. November began well, albeit another tight home victory, 1-0 thanks to a goal from Pancho against the Canaries who'd been promoted with us. We just weren't scoring enough, and while Steve Coppell was mesmeric on the right, the Doc didn't have anyone to complement him on the left, and not only provide another vein of goals, but also service for the aforementioned Pearson. Gordon Hill was bought for £70,000 from Millwall this month, and the Doc described him as the missing piece of the puzzle. After a painful 3-1 defeat at Anfield, where Paddy Roach had a mare and showed us what the sort of level we had to reach in goal, the king of all Cockneys, Gordon Hill, debuted in a comfortable 2-0 win over Villa, which took the boys from 5th to 3rd. However, the next fixture threw up a return against Arsenal, just a handful of games after we'd done them at Old Trafford 3-1. Unfortunately, the Gunners returned the favour as we lost by the same scoreline, but it would be the last league defeat we'd suffer for the next 3 months. We ended November with another narrow win for 2 more points, which put us 5th behind Leeds on goal difference. It was this month that saw us humbled in the League Cup at Main Road, 4-0. City would go on to win the trophy in early '76. They wouldn't pick up any notable silverware until they bought the FA Cup 35 years later. There were 5 matches in December which saw us go unbeaten for the month and show we were title challengers. 2 draws against Middlesbrough and Everton were built upon by another drubbing of Sheffield United, and 2 more wins by the odd goal at Old Trafford against Wolves and Burnley. We were joint top at New Year with Leeds and Liverpool, and Derby, QPR and West Ham was still in the hunt a few points back. Into the new year when we began our FA Cup campaign. We got a favourable draw to get home tie against Oxford United, which again we marginally won 2-1 with 2 Steve Daly pens. The end of the month we had a more comfortable win at Old Trafford against Peterborough United 3-1, which set up a 5th round tie for February at Filbert Street against Leicester. The fans already smelt something in the air that this year was going to be something special. Back to the league and things were still looking good. 2 more wins against high-flying QPR and Birmingham City, as well as a draw at White Hart Lane, meant that we regained top spot, a point from arch-rivals Liverpool. Leeds and Derby were still well in the running, whilst the aforementioned QPR had slightly dropped off. Sadly, this would be the last time we would be top for the rest of the season, although we would always be there or thereabouts and wouldn't drop below 3rd position. Our decline started in February with 5 matches but just 1 victory, a trouncing of West Ham at home. The biggest disappointment was the Old Trafford 0-0 versus Liverpool, which is a real 4-pointer. I'm not even sure they used that terminology in those days. 2 more draws against Coventry and Derby, as well as defeat at Villa Park, saw us drop to 3rd, albeit narrowly on goal difference from Liverpool, and a resurgent QPR who still had title aspirations of their own. I wasn't around due to my lack of birth, but maybe our eyes were already elsewhere, as we edged out the Foxes to set up an FA Cup quarter-final tie with Wolves the following month. As we rushed towards spring, March was a very solid period for us in the league as well as the cup for a change. However, much of the damage to our title ambitions had already been done, but it didn't seem irreparable at that point. There were 3 wins to savour, a 3-2 triumph over dirty Leeds, an exciting victory at St James's Park where the Geordies conceded 2 own goals. The Doc actually put that down to the pressure of Hill and Coppell's sublime service into the box and the opposition's inability to cope. Make your minds up for yourselves. In fact, over the season we'd earned 6 goals by virtue of players putting through their own net when they came across us. A convincing 3-0 triumph over Middlesbrough at home completed that month's victories. The only drop point was at Carrow Road in a 1-1 draw, but with Liverpool and QPR looking very mean in the area of dropping points, each one was vital. By the end of the month, QPR were back at the top by a point, with United sitting pretty in second, and the Scousers a further point back with Derby County. Realistically, it was now between these 4 clubs for the league. Back to the FA Cup, and the quarter-final tie in early March against Wolves at Old Trafford ended in a draw. Going to Molineux 3 days later produced a classic FA Cup tie, as we came from 2-0 down early on to claim the win in extra time thanks to Sammy McElroy. We would face Derby County in the semi-final at Hillsborough in early April. That match was all about Gordon Hill, who scored a couple of typical worldy goals. Merlin had settled in remarkably well since November, and United looked a far better side with his mercurial talents on the left. We would face 2nd Division Southampton in the final, and victory looked like a foregone conclusion for many within and without the club. As QPR and Liverpool maintained a very high level of consistency, April was the month that, not for the last time in our history going forward, we would spectacularly throw away our title bid. 2 wins against Everton and Burnley were admirable, but the 3 defeats either side doomed us to finish 3rd spot at that season's end. I imagine it must have been comparable to the 91-92 title being relinquished to Leeds. With everything tying up in May, Liverpool took the title, as with all United challenges under the Dock, Sexton, Atkinson, even Fergie when you think of the aforementioned 91-92 title challenge. We showed that we had the players and potential to win it, but when push came to shove, we neither had the mentality nor the consistency, and we were found wanting. Whilst United managed only 5 wins from their last 9 games, leaving empty-handed in 3 of those, QPR won 13 of the last 15, a massive feat, while the old enemy recorded 8 victories in their last 9 matches. Our defeats had come against Ipswich Town and Stoke at Old Trafford, and Leicester on the road, all very beatable. 2 more wins and a draw out of that, and we would have been champions, but that's easy to say now. The only thing left for us with the championship being dashed was the cup final at Wembley against the Saints. But not as important but still meaningful, we had a derby date with City a few days after that match, as we caught up on rearranged fixtures. Stepping into the future slightly, we'd win the derby 2-0, securing European football for the first time in 7 years. But which competition? The UEFA Cup or the Cup Winners' Cup? The FA Cup final produced high hopes, and whilst not a classic, we did have our chances. Lou Macari failing to convert here, and also an effort from Sammy Mack off the bar after a dangerous centre from Hill, were massive chances we should have put away. Unable to secure opportunities, with about 10 minutes to go, a through ball to Bobby Stokes, which would have given the VAR operators something to do if they'd been around in those days, and Alex Stepney should have done a lot better with. Oh yeah, and I don't think it's escaped any of you that through ball was from Jim McAleog, who was a United player up to the summer before. Nevertheless, Southampton hung on for their maiden FA Cup triumph, whilst we were left to rue our missed chances in the league and the cup. It could have been so different. The Doc humbly admitted that the best team won, but would be back for the next year's final. Runners-up in the cup, 3rd in the league, the best position since they came 2nd in '68, and despite the disappointments after several bleak years, the future finally looked bright. Furthermore, that high finish earned the side that UEFA Cup spot for the 1976-77 campaign, something that United fans hadn't experienced yet this decade. So there it is, the retrospective, my season as a United fan 1975-76, which was a mixture of such disappointment coupled with such promise for the future. But unlike me, if you were around, what did it mean to you? Let us know in the comments, and like, share and subscribe. Thank you as always for your support.